Sweet. Hi, guys. So we're looking today at Topicalization, a Polynesian language, and we're specifically looking at the TAM, or the tense aspect modal particle, and movements of it. So let's get straight into it. So our key claims base around this TAM particle, and the TAM particle is often been argued to well, it's clause initial, and it's often been argued thus to be derived from T to C movement in other closely related languages. Now we look at Topicalization and feel and argue that this T to C movement cannot be straightforwardly adopted in Topicalization to create that TAM initial word order. So our suggestion is that if we adopt some sort of finer left periphery, then we can get that explanation of the word order and the complexities in sentence structure. So we argue that the TAM does raise, but it raises to thin, not to C, a single complementizer position. So Topicalization has a basic TAM initial word order, and then we have an unmarked VSO structure, as in one, where we have a TAM particle followed by the verb and then the two arguments. We can also get a TAM VOS order, and we have those two structures and we have to derive them accordingly. Crucially, the TAM particle always seems to precede the verb in these languages. Often in many Polynesian languages, it has the same ordering. So one of our first assumptions is that this TAM particle originates in the TP, in the T head. And we have a TAM particle that has to be clause initial. So what is argued for other Polynesian languages is that this particle raises to C. So TAM to C movement, also called T to C movement. And it's been proposed for Samoan and Tongan, and one of the reasons it's proposed is it accounts for a complementary distribution of the TAM particle and complementizers, which we're going to get to a little bit later. But first, let's have a quick look at two of the arguments for T to C movement in other related languages. So for Tongan, Otsuka has argued that we get this V movement up to T, and we collect the TAM particle there. Now, Tongan has the VOS and the VSO word orders, and it has been argued that this is due to some sort of scrambling of the DP subject or object. And this raises to spec TP, and as such, with the verb and the TAM particle being preceding those DPs, we have to then raise that collection a little bit further, and that's why we get the T to C movement. We also would have to somehow explain some sort of tucking in with the word order based around that mirror principle, that it would be slightly different to have the ordering at the end be CTV rather than VTC. So that's Tongan. We also have Samoan, where Collins has argued that there are these subject pronouns that appear actually preceding the verb, and he argues that the subject pronoun ends up in spec TP. So we also have TAM particles in Samoan, but these are found preceding any subject pronouns. So as such, he raises the TAM to C to get that final word order, which will be TAM subject pronoun and then the rest of the clause. Now, one of the critical things in both languages actually is that TAM particles and complementizers are in complementary distribution. So this is where we get to now. Now, what the argument is that if they are found in this same syntactic position, then they're basically competing for the same spot. And when the complementizer is filling this C position, then the TAM cannot also go there. So that kind of gives us the explanation of why tam and complementizers are in complementary distribution. And therefore we have that raising, that T to C movement, which brings the tam particle into the same slot as the complementizers. So looking back to Topicalization, we get very similar structures compared to these other languages. In 3 and 4, we have two biclausal structures where the matrix clause has its tam particle, just like normal, and it's followed by a complementizer, but no tam particle. And crucially, no tam particle can actually appear. If you put one in, we find that it's ungrammatical. So we're getting that same complementary distribution between the two particles. Now, the issue that we have found is that we actually also get complementizers that do not show this distribution. So in 5 and 6, we have complementizers that are followed by an overt tam particle. And so we're finding that we're getting not only those complementizers from the previous slide that are in complementary distribution, but we're also getting ones that can appear perfectly grammatically with a tam particle as well. So what we have proposed is that to understand this distribution, we're going to need two complementizer positions. So this is sort of relating to the RISI 1997 proposal, and we've got our force P and our fin P. Now, what we've said is that if the two can co-occur with tam, then they are going to, these complementizers are going to fit in that force P, whereas if they cannot have a co-occurrence with the tam particle, then those complementizers will fit in the fin P. Now, one of the cross-linguistic assumptions here is that if we have any sort of topicalization, then they are going to sit in between force P and fan P. So if we're getting that structure in between, then we actually have some predictions about where any topics are going to appear in sentences with complementizers. Now, in Topicalization, like many Polynesian languages, we do actually have these topics. But before we get into this, we have to look at the complementary distribution of the tam particle and those complementizers in fin. Now, we claim that tam still raises, but it raises into fin. And so we can still have that, the higher complementizers co-occurring with tam particles, and we can't have that distribution with the complementizers such as ki and oi. So let's get back to the topicalization. So in Topicalization, we do have topicalization happening. In 7, we have the object in situ, so to speak. And in 8, we raise it up to a clause initial position higher than the tam particle. And topics in this language are marked with this core particle. Now, when we look at the topicalization co-occurring with complementizer situations, we find our predictions are correct. So in 9, when we have a pay complementizer, we are following it with a topic, the co-topic. Now, our assumption was that pay was in force P, and therefore a topic would be lower than force P. Whereas in number 10, we find that when we have a key complementizer, then we have that topic preceding the complementizer itself. Now, we said that key was in the fin P, so any topic position would be higher than fin. And that's exactly what we find with these two structures. So if we're getting a co-topic following pay, then we assume that this topicalized projection is below force P, where those pay particles appear. And that's the general prediction of these expanded left peripheries. And if we're getting this topic preceding any key complementizers, then we assume that topicalization projection is above fin P, as also predicted by cross-linguistic evidence. So what we end up getting is some sort of proposal based on the left periphery. So in the higher positions, we get this pay complementizer, and these can co-occur with tam particles, as is predicted by this structure. Following that, we get some sort of topic projection where we have some sort of co-topic marking occurring, and this will always follow any pay complementizers. Now, lower than that, we get this fin P, this area which has the key complementizers. And what we argue here is that our tam raises up to fin, or we have these key complementizers in that position. And this accounts for the complementary distribution of those two particles. But we also account for the fact that the co-topics precede complementizers in this position. They also precede tam particles in this position, as you would expect. Now, this leads us on to deriving the verb placement in these clauses. So we've kind of assumed or explained how we can generate this tam initial order, but we also have a VSO and a VOS order to derive. So with our tam particle sort of out the way, we now have to understand where the verb is moving. So here's our second assumption. We are assuming that, like other Polynesian languages, we are getting an underlying SVO word order. Now, what has been therefore argued is that there are two possible ways that we can derive the verb initial part of these clauses. One is the Otsuka method that moves the verb up to T and then to C, and we get a subject or object moving into spec TP. We also get Massam's way for Nuean, where we have VP movement or predicate movement moving to spec TP. This is somehow based on an EPP projection. So in this structure, we have the two variants. We get the VP when it contains the object and then moves, where we're going to get that VOS because the whole V and O have moved together. Whereas if we want to get the VSO, then we have the object evacuating the V first, or the VP, sorry, and then we get that VP moving up, and then we get that tam VSO order. Now, we are going to end up picking the VP movement based on the fact that we do have evidence that there is VP movement in Topicalization. So this VP fronting or V fronting have been looked at in many different verb initial languages, and there are various ways to argue the two structures. Crucially for us, if we have a look at the VP fronting, if we're getting a VSO order, we have to remove the object from the VP. And if we're getting a VOS order, we can relieve that object in the VP before it moves up. So the evidence that we have VP movement, just one of the pieces of evidence is coordinated verbs. Now, coordinated verbs must be understood as some sort of XP, so a full projection. And in Topicalization, as we can see in 11, those coordinated verbs all appear up in that higher clause section. And if they're both appearing, in this case, the kick and hit are both appearing up in that position, then we have to assume that the whole XP has moved, or the whole VP containing the two different verbs has moved up. So what we have to make an assumption there is that if the whole VP is moving, then we are getting VP movement in Topicalization. And there are some various ways that we can also understand that. Now, what we have to do then is derive our two orders. So what has been claimed for many languages that have this VP fronting is that the EPP feature on the T head that often brings, say, the subject up in English, that EPP feature has some sort of plus predicate on it. And that raises the entire predicate in every single clause to spec TP. Now, we are going to take that analysis and we're going to say that the predicate raises to spec TP. Now, we've also talked about the tam particle, which originates in T, and we've claimed it raises up to fin. Now, if we combine those two movements, we end up getting this tam then verb word order with tam in the fin position and then followed by the predicate or VP in spec TP. So working out how to derive these two orders is relatively simple. We get the VOS order when the entire predicate raises into that spec TP position. So if we have a look at that base order, we have the tam and then we have the SVO. And our first step would be to raise the whole VP up into spec TP. And the second step would be to have that tam movement, which brings the tam beyond the verb and the object. So then we've created that tam VOS order that we do see in Topicalization. Now, with the VSO order is a little bit more difficult because we have to remove the object from the VP before VP movement. If there's VP movement and there's tam to fin movement, then we get the correct order. So our base order has tam followed by SVO, just as the other. But then we have this object raising out. There are several places that it has been claimed to go to. We just simply follow columns and raise it to a spec VP position lower than the subject, but there are many different arguments for where this could go. And then we have that VP movement still, but the VP movement no longer contains the object. So the VP movement raises to spec TP and followed by our tam to fin movement. Now that brings the tam from T up to fin above the VP, and we get that tam VSO structure. So visually, this can be quite simply explained with these arrows. We have our various movements. For VOS, we have to have a VP movement and followed by this tam to fin movement, and that gets our appropriate tam VOS order. And with the VOSO clause, we get two movements. First, we get this object out of the VP, then we get that VP movement. Finally, that last same movement that we've already talked about, tam goes to fin, and the result is we still get a VSO order. So a quick summary of where this has taken us. We've raised our tam to fin, where these key complementizers are positioned. Now, different complementizers are positioned in force P, and we have a nice bit of evidence to show those two different positions with our topics. And our topics seem to go higher than the fin P, but lower than the force P, which is then worked out in the actual data. So code topics raise up to spec of the topic P and therefore follow any of the pay complementizers, but not the key ones. Finally, we argued that we follow the VP movement idea, bringing the VP up to spec TP, and to get our two different orders, we get the object either remains in the VP, getting the VOS order, or the object leaves the VP, getting the VSO order. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. So we have 10 minutes for questions and comments. Emily?
Yeah, thank you so much for this talk. I was curious about a potential like data that we don't necessarily see, and I'm wondering why. So I'm wondering what rules out when you have that lower complementizer in the fin projection, what prevents the TAM marker from just staying where it is? So this is a question I think about what's motivating that TAM movement, because since it's head to head, it doesn't really seem like it could be an EPP feature or something like that.
Yeah, it's a good point. So far, for other Polynesian languages, that distribution has simply been claimed based on that complementary distribution of the two particles. So we've kind of had to follow the original arguments based on that. But it's a fair point that there doesn't seem to be any explanation of why these term particles would have to move in those positions.
It's something that we definitely thought about. And I feel like one way of describing it is that either you get TAM to fin movement, or you do not get TAM to be phonologically pronounced. And exactly what motivates that, yeah, we are not sure, but yeah, that's the best you've got so far.
Right. Thank you so much.
Okay, then we have a hand from Yuko. Go ahead.
Yep, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks very much for this interesting talk. It gave me a lot of things to think about. And I'm really happy to see a talk on Polynesian languages. And so I have a couple of data questions. The first one is about VOS. In your example is actually the noun incorporation type of sentence on the first slide. Is that the only VOS pattern that you get? O is never case marked, or even like let me just say that not even with an article. It's always a bare noun.
It's a great point, because we seem to be getting this this noun incorporation examples, which we've sort of focused on, but there does seem to be, like Tongan, examples where you can get case marked objects preceding the subject. What seems to be happening in those cases is that we have some sort of topicalization situation, because you can also put in that same position, you can put prepositional phrases, particularly focused or marked prepositional phrases, and then we get which is surprising for these Polynesian languages. So we definitely are able to get objects case marked after the verb and then before the subject, but it does seem to have some speaker variation. Some of our speakers have said yes, it's perfectly okay, and others have said they just wouldn't use it.
Okay, thank you. So, but it's to me it's very interesting, because I think in New Zealand you cannot get case marked VOS, right? And that's why Diane advocated for this VP movement. And any case marked one has to evacuate it from VP before the VP movement. So that's one point I was kind of curious. If in Tokelauan you can see non-bare nouns in VOS O position, what motivates, the choice between VOS and VSO? But that's something that you might want to explore later on. And another case data question is the 10, or was it 10, example 10, where you see K and co-occurring. This is, so this was very, in a way, shocking to me. I've never seen this kind of topicalization within K-marked clause.
Yeah, we were very surprised by it, but it actually came out without us trying to elicit it. It came out when we was just asking questions around it, and he naturally, our speaker naturally topicalized it before the K particle, which we were, yeah, as you say, quite surprised at. But when we formed that analysis with the left periphery, it made a lot of sense why that would be the case.
We did try to put it after K, and that does not work.
Right, no, you can't do that. But then that goes back to sort of like Emily's point, why we can't have like our TAM and K-type complementizer together. One possibility is that these K is actually TAM.
Yeah, we did.
You know, and still your analysis that there is a force head and a finite head, you can still maintain it, and even if you treat K as a TAM itself.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think there were a few attempts to swap in other TAM particles, which didn't fit. So it was yeah, it was looked at, but it was quite difficult to then conclude that it was simply a TAM particle.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the talk.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? While waiting for others to come up with their questions, I actually have a very naive question. So you're dealing with different complementizers, and I wonder if there are similar differences between TAM markers. So here you only dealt with one TAM marker, but are there any cases where more than one TAM marker occurs in a sentence? And if so, do they always behave similarly, or what happens?
Yeah, I see what you mean. I mean, in 9, in the example, we can see we can change the subordinate clause TAM particle, and it just changes what tense that subordinate clause is, and you can replace that TAM particle with any other types of futures or past.
I think Hiroki, you are asking if there can be several TAM particles occurring at once. Is that what you are?
No, if there are two, for example, I know almost nothing about Polynesian languages. So if there are, so for example, if a sentence has an aspect marker and also a mood marker, these two co-occur, what will happen in this case?
I think it's only one.
Yeah.
There's only one, okay.
It can be
Then,
only one or two. Yeah.
All right, thanks. We still have a minute. There doesn't seem to be anyone yet. Okay, then let's finish this session and ask